Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another installment of the No Trade Clause podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Washington, and joining me on this installment of the podcast, episode 121, is David Brandon. David is actually a second-time guest on the podcast. Previously, he was audio only last time around, so I think we got all the technical issues worked out this time. He's audio, he's video, he's ready to go. David is a huge salary cap CBA enthusiast. He's all over NBA Twitter, interacting with the fans, talking about just all the different things that are going down in the NBA. And that kind of brings us to the topic of our discussion for tonight's podcast. It's going to be 3 extensions that were all signed within the last week or so. So David joins me this time to help break down those extensions and exactly what they mean for the teams involved, their futures, surrounding players, etc. So David, I really appreciate you taking the time to join this podcast. It's been a while since we jumped on together, so I'm glad we have the opportunity again, and looking forward to just kind of going back and forth with you about these extensions, man.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Awesome, man. Glad to hear that. So let's jump right into the first extension of today's discussion, and that's going to be the one and only Stephen Curry of the Golden State Warriors, coming off of an incredible Olympic gold run, at least for the last 2 games, to where he helped that team bring home the gold. Those games against Serbia and France were the stuff of legend. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like that in the history of basketball, at least in my history. So after that, the Warriors came to him and said, hey, man, we know you're under contract for 2 more years. We're going to tack on 1 more year. And actually, due to a specific rule in the CBA, that's all they can offer him was a 1-year extension for $62.6 million. So that brings the full value of his current contract up to 3 years. This coming season is going to be about $55.7 million. And for 25-26, it's going to be about $59.6 million. So you add it all up. I mean, he's under contract for 3 more years. He's already about 35 years old, 36 years old. So that last season, David, is really interesting because it's the age 38 season. So that kind of brings in a unique set of rules for him and what he can get. What they can offer. So basically what this over 38 rule means is that last year of his deal, that age 38 season, his salary is going to be deferred. It's counted as deferred salary. So this is significant because usually when you sign a contract, you have all the money for each year of that contract. It goes to team salary. It's tacked on to team salary as is, but for the age 38, it's deferred, so it's not counted as team salary until the year it is earned. So when he hits 38, if he actually plays that season, if he's on the roster, then he will get that money as he is planned to get. But before then, it's going to be deferred. So it's basically like, hey, if you play this long, if you're still on the team, still in the league, you get the money. But it's just to prevent players from getting to a certain age and they're under contract and then they retire, like they don't actually play that season in which they were signed. It effectively closed a loophole in the CBA. So when you get to players ages 38 and up, LeBron James, you get the Currys of the world, it's a unique set of rules for them. So, but it's only in the age 38 season. Other 2 seasons are normal because they'll be age 36 for this season and 37 for next season. So just to kind of break that down a little bit. But this is a no-brainer. I mean, this is one of those like legacy contracts in my mind. When you look at players like Kobe Bryant back in the day, he was already on the decline. He wasn't the same player, but they threw the bag at him because it's Kobe Bryant, you know? And it's the same thing with Curry. I mean, Curry is a franchise player. He's one of the best in the league. He's one of the best players of all time. So it's like, hey, if we can give this deal to him, we're going to give it to him because he's that good. That's what he means to our franchise. It was a no-brainer in this situation. So that's the gist of it. I wanted to pass it over to you, David, just to kind of get your thoughts on this. And if there's anything I overlooked, feel free to chime in on that. But, you know, do you have anything else to add to this deal? Because in my mind, it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, he's elite and, you know, they're going to give him this deal no matter what. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I mean, like, they can't afford not to give him that contract. He is the franchise effectively in Golden State. Like, he made that franchise what it is, right? And in addition, like, he's the core of the team. There is no Golden State without Curry, even in its current iteration, right? His shooting, his off-the-bounce playmaking, his ability to stretch the defense is what makes that team what it is. And they've been through several iterations at this point, and I don't think this is close to any of the best iterations they've had. Quite frankly, I think that front office has a lot of work to do to be able to give him a nice swan song on his way out. But this move in particular, you have to do. And I'll say too, like, a lot of fans are going to see the numbers on that and get sticker shock. Back in 2012, Steph Curry's 38th year salary is more than the entire salary cap in 2012, if I remember correctly. So fans are going to get a little bit of sticker shock. But it's also, there's so much more money coming into the league. And then you look at it as a percentage of the cap, and it's, 36.8% in the 2026-27. That's estimated percentage of the cap, which is about equal to, any max contract ever in the history of the league. That's like kind of that's the 35% max. So right. It's not a crazy contract, especially given his production. We're seeing more and more guys play into their 30s, their late 30s, with not a ton of fall off. I mean, Chris Paul isn't what he was, but he's good. LeBron James is as good as ever. Maybe a little slower on defense, but he's still great. Like, a lot of these guys are playing at ages we used to think were impossible. The record for small guards isn't as good, but Curry's got enough. He's like he's over 6 foot. I know that much. I don't know exactly what, but he's a big enough player, and he's been shielded from getting bashed around enough that I think he can play productively well into that season. So I think it's a great move. I don't love the rest of their moves, or lack thereof, as I think they need to do a job of putting a team around him right now. But yeah.
So you brought up the team around him, and that reminds me of a tweet that I posted to our No Trade Clause Twitter just the other day. If you expand out just a couple more seasons and you look at who is on the roster during that time, and you look at guaranteed contracts only, you're going to get one player that's fully guaranteed right now, no options, no non-guarantees. Steph Curry is the only one for the 26-27 season that is currently fully guaranteed on the books for that season. And we're only talking about 2 seasons from now. So you have Steph Curry with the 62.5 kicking in for that extension. You have Wiggins and Green, who are player options. You have Hield and Kyle Anderson, who are non-guarantees. You have Podziemski, who is player option, or rather team option, but of course that's more than likely going to be picked up next year when they can do that. And then you have Trace Jackson Davis, also with that team option for his fourth season. So it's really interesting because Curry is on the Bucks. He's the oldest player on the Warriors roster. He's one of the oldest players in the entire league. And he's the only one that's solidly on the books right now for that season. So to your point, there's some more work to be done to bring some more guys in around him. You don't want Curry playing for a Warriors team that's winning 30 games or missing the playoffs. I mean, that's just not a great way to send him out. So you're going to have to work on Wiggins. I mean, he could opt out. He's still going to be, I think at that point, early 30s when he hits that player option. Green, that's also kind of wait and see. He might pick that up. He'll be pretty old by that point as well.
I can't imagine a world where they don't pick those up. Honestly.
I think Green is pretty certain because of his age.
Yeah.
I want to say Wiggins a little less certain, but I would still say probably more likely than not. $30 million in 2 years. That's a pretty good amount of money to pick up. And then Hield and Anderson, I really think it just kind of depends on how they fit in and how they kind of progress with this team. They could be on the roster. They could continue to they could guarantee their contracts for that season, but it's a waiting game with them. They haven't even played a game for the Warriors yet, so we're going to have to wait and see. But, yeah, all in all, I think this is a great deal. They're just going to have to make more moves in order to kind of make that look better. If you make that move in a vacuum, it looks good, but you have to accompany it with other moves that put a team around him. They have some pretty young players here that look good. Jackson Davis and Bazemski look really good. It looks like they're going to be long-term pieces. But after that, and that kind of middle tier of player, like other starters and good bench players, I don't really see a ton of guys here. So
they really need to hope. They need to hope the Kuminga and or Moody pops. If one of those guys pops, it'll help a lot, especially Kuminga because he plays. They got a lot of shooting guard type guys. Kuminga plays a position that's a little less saturated, but yeah, they really need, because those guys, one of those guys popping would make the team look a lot better, and kind of settle things for a year or two out. Those guys, one of those guys or both those guys would probably still be on the books, but we'll see.
Sure. Yeah, Kuminga in particular. I mean, I think I'm pretty certain he's going to get some kind of deal from the Warriors. It's probably going to have to wait another year. I mean, I haven't heard anything about extension talks really ramping up. I think they have until right before the season starts to make a decision on that, or else he'll be a restricted free agent next summer, which, of course, they have first rights. They'll probably keep him around. I would think they keep him around. He showed great flashes last season. And like you said, I mean, other than Draymond, I mean, there's not a lot of guys in that position, about the 3 or 4 position that are really keepers for this team. So you really need to keep him around. And it looks like a similar situation to what Philly dealt with this summer with Maxey coming up in restricted free agency. And, of course, they kept him around for big money. But by waiting, it kind of gives them more flexibility next summer to maybe make some other moves before you kind of double down and give Kuminga that kind of money.
Yep, absolutely.
So let's go ahead and move on to another team also located in California that made a lot of interesting moves this summer. And this past week was another quite interesting move on their part. Another extension, this time for Ivica Zubac. So they're keeping him in the fold. I first off want to say that I think Zubac is definitely one of the more underrated players in our league. He doesn't get a lot of credit for what he does as a rim protector. You go and look at the advanced stats when it comes to the field goal percentage allowed at the rim. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I based on what I've seen in past seasons, he's definitely in the upper end of the spectrum in terms of just making life difficult for opposing centers, just opposing players in general. So with a guy like Zubac, you know what you're going to get. He's super solid, a good rim runner, a good rebounder, a good team player. And he was under contract. He is under contract for this coming season at just $11.5 million. Really good deal for a starting center. And then it's going to jump up next year in 2025 for the first year of the extension for 18.1. The second year is 19.5. And then the final year in 27-28 is going to be $21 million. Now, I kind of want to start this off, David, by asking you a question. Because I think we had this similar discussion on our last podcast. We talked about Jared Allen's extension and the kind of money he's making. And it is actually more than what Zubac is making. I think he's in the $28 million range when you get to the latter years of his extension. And Zubac is only at about 2021. So the conversation revolved around market value for centers. That's kind of where like some of us kind of had a problem with what Jared Allen was making or going to make. It seemed a little high. And then we kind of compared him to players like Hartenstein, looking at what he's making. So in your evaluation, looking at 18, 19, 21 million, given that the fact that the salary cap is going to rise, do you think this is a cost-effective move for the Clippers to make for a guy like Zubac that's not an all-star level center? He's not any kind of star in that way, but he's really solid. Just from a monetary standpoint, do you feel like this is a good value for the Clippers?
I do. I mean, I think being a Thunder fan, my mind immediately goes to Steven Adams, who's another guy who's like just a solid center, and the kind of money that he made with this deal with the Thunder, which was probably a bit of an overpay, but they tend to do that to get guys on extension. And then like even Memphis. Like I look at history of what centers make. He's making about 10%, 11% of the salary cap in 25, 26, and 26, 27. That's, to me, for a starting center, especially one that's as solid as Zubac is, like, I take that all day. Especially for a team like the Clippers that is so close to the first apron, that has had to get some flexibility back. It does give them some flexibility. It's a very tradable deal if they want to trade. They should be very happy with it on their books. And he's a solid, I would say this is fair. This is fair money, or maybe slightly less than fair money, quite frankly. It's solid. Centers tend to get paid slightly more than I think people expect. And I don't know why that is, but just a lot of times with smart salary cap people that I talk to, center is the one position that we consistently underestimate how much they're going to make. I think the league values it slightly higher, even for kind of journeyman guys. So yeah, I like the deal. I like the deal for them. They're not going to get anyone better in the free agency with the money that they had to work with, and it's very fair.
You bring up a great point, David, when you talk about the value that teams place on centers relative to, I think, the value that we as fans, or most fans, I would say, place on centers. They see centers making 20, 25, approaching 30, and they're not even like franchise level centers, and people get sticker shock. That's a word that I've heard tossed around so many times over the past year or so. It's so common to see people freak out when they see 20, 30, 40, 50 million going out to players. They're like, for him? Like, is he really worth all that? I've never heard of that guy, or I don't know much about him. But if you really kind of dig in to the impact that centers have, you look at the Jared Allens, and you look at the Hartensteins, and you look at the Zubaches of the world. Are they going to carry an offense? No, that's not their role. They're not at Towns. They're not, one of these other like incredible. They're not Embiid. They're not going to drop 30 plus points frequently like that. But they provide a level of rebounding. And we've seen in the Thunder situation where that can really hurt them, not having a sturdy center. That's why they brought in Hartenstein. That's why they probably kind of overpaid for him, because they understood what they needed from that position. And I'm sure, you've seen that a lot, and you've been around the discourse a lot. So it kind of fits into the discussion here.
That's an interesting one. If we have like a couple of minutes, I might dig into that just slightly, because I think the Hartenstein deal, I think it's very hard to overpay short deals. I think most short deals tend to be fine if they're 2 years or less. I think it's very hard to overpay for a guy, except for Tobias Harris, because somehow the Pistons found a way. But
he just keeps getting paid. He's one of the best agents in the world, I swear. How does he keep doing this? He can't get away with it.
He can't get away with this. But yeah, no. It is interesting when you look at centers. I mean, I had the experience, last year, like Holmgren was the one kind of, you can say Jalen Williams, but he's even a little bit, he doesn't really have the size to be full-time center. He's 6'10", but he's got some beef to it, but he does get pushed around a little bit. He was the biggest guy on the roster the year before by a long shot. They had like Kenrich Williams playing center a lot at like 6'7". So I've had the experience of watching a centerless team, basically. And people don't realize how much just a steady hand at the tiller at that position means. Just for like getting you through the regular season, just having a guy that you can say, all right, he's there for the back line. If I screw up on my coverage, there's someone there to help.
Right.
That means a lot to a team. Just having someone that you can be like, okay, they're going to get the rebound, where you're not constantly going 100 miles per hour and having to exert full effort, because you have a guy who's got enough beef on him to say, no, that's my rebound. Mm-hmm. That matters. And I think fans underestimate that a little bit, especially with the small ball revolution the last several years. We've seen kind of a swing back against the traditional center. And I don't know, beef matters.
Beef matters. We need to make that a hashtag or something. I like that. No, but seriously, I mean, it's really valuable to have rim protection, have rebounding on the interior. You look at the teams that went deep in the playoffs this past spring, the Mavs.
They're
They have
big
two great
teams.
centers. Yeah, Gafford, Lively. I mean, cleaning up, protecting the rim, getting lobs. You look at of course, with the Timberwolves, having Towns in there, having Naz Reid in there, having Gobert in there. It's no secret that teams with good, sturdy centers will have a lot of success. Even the Celtics, having Al Horford in there with as old as he is, still just a really solid guy having the interior and to also space the floor, do all the little things, there's a common theme here where we look at teams that have good, solid centers on the inside. Typically, not always. It's not like, oh, you get a good center and all of a sudden you're going to be a title contender. But if you're a great team and you're missing that, that can really help you kind of get over the hump or just give you that little extra edge. So I can see why there's a divide between what fans think about the center market and what teams think about them. The teams know that, like, hey, this is basically a prerequisite to being an elite team. So they're willing to pay them pretty good money. Nick Claxton is another one. This is a team that's rebuilding. The Nets are not going anywhere next season of significance. But still, I mean, Nick Claxton is one of the better defenders in our league, even though he's slider frame. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He's kind of built like Chet in a way.
Yeah.
But, man, he's impactful. So, I mean, these guys demand money that their agents know. These players know, like, hey, these guys are getting this much, 15, 20, 25, pushing 30. I feel like I'm worth somewhere in that window of money. So that's where we get Zubac making $70 million over 4 years, which I agree with you. I think it's a great value, especially for a guy that's just going to be consistent as they come. And he's not going to be too old at the end of it. It's not like he's going to be in his mid-30s when it's over. He's just now hitting kind of the latter part of his 20s. So he's probably going to age well into the latter years. And it's also tradable. So if the Clippers find themselves in a situation in the next couple of years, which I think they will, to where they pivot because, Kawhi getting into the end of his career, same for Harden, they need to go in a different direction. Okay, let's say Zubac is 30, 29 years old. Hey, flip him for a couple, some picks, a couple of good young players. There's a lot of ways they can go with this. So I think they made a good move here, just tacking on years because of where they're at and also where they could be just with the flexibility of everything. So this next deal, it's a little trickier, I think, because he's a little bit older than Zubac. I think this is the least expected deal that we're going to talk about here this evening, David. This is going to be TJ McConnell for the upstart Indiana Pacers, making their way all the way to the conference finals this past spring. One of the great feel-good stories of the season, in my opinion. A lot of guys just kind of play their role to perfection. Of course, you got the stars. You got Halliburton doing his thing. There's so many guys here that just kind of found a role and just played it to perfection. And that resulted in a lot of extensions for the Pacers. So TJ McConnell obviously is one. But you go look at the other guys like Andrew Nembhard got an extension. Siakam got a new deal. He was actually a free agent, but they maxed him out basically. Obi Toppin got a new deal as well. So a lot of players outperform their contracts. They're under new contracts. And then TJ McConnell, he did the same thing. You look at the way that he guarded Brunson in a New York series, the way he ran the offense, the way he just kind of kept things in order, playing with Halliburton, playing with Shepherd. No matter who he's playing with, he always makes an impact. His presence is always felt on the court. And that brings value. And that brings new money. So for McConnell's situation, he is under contract this coming season for just $9.3 million. Less than a mid-level. I love that for the Pacers. That's great. The total value of this contract, I mean, you look at the average annual value, you're somewhere in the neighborhood of like $10.5 to $11 million a season. I think that's great. However, the years is interesting. And I really want your take on this because I saw it. I saw the money. I wasn't shocked. But then I saw the total length of the extension, and that kind of got me a little bit because McConnell's not a spring chicken. He's not Zubac. He's not Jarrett Allen. He's not Halliburton. The dude's already 32. So if we extrapolate this out, he has 5 more years on this deal. Now, the latter part is not guaranteed. I'll get to that in a minute. But if he makes it to the end of his contract, I mean, the dude's 37 basically. So for a guy that of his height, and you touched on this a little bit with Curry, it's trickier for a guy like that. He doesn't have explosiveness. He's not super athletic. He doesn't have a deep long ball like Curry does. He's not a huge player. I mean, there's a lot working against him. So, extending a guy out for 4 years past the current season, a little dicey. But I will give it to the Pacers. I expected this to happen. There is $10 million non-guaranteed in this deal. So for his age 36 season, he'll be making 11.8. Only $5 million is guaranteed. Age 37 season, so 28-29, same thing. 11.8 million, only 5 million guaranteed of the 11.8. So we're looking at less than half is guaranteed. That's good for the Pacers. I give them credit for that. It just kind of stressed me out a little bit seeing 5 years for a guy that's 32 and is not a superstar and he's not super athletic. So overall, I think I'm not like super giddy on this deal, but I do like it. I would say to me it's like a B, somewhere in that area, maybe a B minus. Looking at the money involved per season is a high value, but there's diminishing returns looking at how old he's going to be in the latter years. So that's kind of how I felt about it. But how did you feel about it, Dave, when you saw this? Were you surprised at all by this deal?
This is going to be a really boring podcast because we pretty much agree on this stuff. I don't think we've disagreed on it. I'm okay with it. I don't love it. I think the Pacers, for a lot of small market teams, and I think the Pacers in particular, value keeping their guys, having a steady core, being, always on the edge of contention. If things break right, you can make a run, but never being like truly, truly bad. I mean, not that they haven't been, but they try not to be. And I think McConnell's kind of an extension of that sort of philosophy. They're like, okay, it might be a little long, but we know him. He fits in our system. We understand what we're getting from him. The back end, if it becomes an issue, we have a little bit of insurance built in. I think like the Thunder do this as well. They're okay with paying a little bit more on an extension for a guy if they like him. The Thunder infamously did this with Kyle Singler, which turned out very, very badly. But but like Steven Adams is an example, or like there's a bunch of guys Nick Collison. There's a bunch of guys that they've done that with. Where Collison's maybe a bad example because he was actually pretty good value. But I think the Pacers, they like their guy, they have their guy, they're happy to have him. If they're going to take a little bit of a risk on the back end, they're okay with it. My question's more the rest of the roster. The Pacers were very bad defensively last year. Despite, they were a little better after they got Siakam. They actually got a little bit out of Wiseman, which I was not expecting. There's a few guys on that roster that could have some upside. The question becomes, they didn't completely stand pat this year, but they're pretty close. The question becomes, is this a team that has more in the tank? You're kind of running it back mostly with similar guys. Does the consistency help you get to a higher level next year? I don't know. I would not bet against them because Carlisle's a good coach. They've got a good front office. I like a lot of the guys on that team. They have the pieces to do well. The question is how well. A lot depends on some of the young guys really stepping up. So we'll see. Yeah, I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's fine.
Yeah, it's good, not great. I think it's kind of where we fall on that spectrum. Yeah, it's really interesting how this team is built. And yeah, your first point about like how consistent they are, I think really stands out. You look at how the Pacers have operated. As far back as you can think, they have very few Detroit Piston type seasons, like 20, 25, like 27 wins. That doesn't really happen for them. If they really fall off, you're looking at like 33, 34 wins, like worst case scenario for this team. And then It only takes 1 or 2 seasons for something to click. They find a Halliburton, they find a Sabonis, they find a Paul George, and they're right back into the contention window. So, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think they're doubling down on the success that they found last season. This team fits really well together. They have a lot of depth. They're still pretty young. There's upside to be tapped into. Jarris Walker, I think James Wiseman still has something to offer. I agree with you on that. Obi Toppin has really exploded with them. I love what he's brought to that team. Naismith, same thing. He's found his role. I think another potential negative of this deal that I see, and it's not the worst problem to have in the world, but when you look at the rotation of guards for this team, McConnell is a big part of that, but they also have some young guys in the fold that need minutes. So you look at Andrew Nimhard, he's going to need minutes. He has his own extension coming up next year. He's a big part of their core. Ben Shepherd, he had a lot of great minutes for the Pacers, even in the playoffs. He's a big part of their core. Benedict Mathurin, we forget about him, but he's still there, and he's a big bench scorer. He was a big bench scorer for them, so I think his role is still kind of undefined. Is he a sixth man? Is he a starter? That's still kind of in the air. So when you pair Halliburton with all those guys, and we're talking about like 5 guards that are all legitimate rotation-level guys that are going to need time to develop together. So for next season, maybe it's not a big deal. The hierarchy is pretty set. But once we get into maybe years 2 and 3, progressing through this deal, and those guys get better, I mean, yeah, you can slide TJ back down the pecking order, but I don't know. I think there could be a little bit of like a struggle to kind of put everybody in a proper place to where they're getting the minutes that they should get. Yeah, again, I don't think it's a huge deal, and especially not for next season. I think it's not something you need to worry about right now. It's just something in the back of my mind that I thought could potentially start to make its presence known on this team over time. But I mean, yeah, I think this team is built really well. They do have to worry about Miles Turner next year because he will be a free agent. But in the meantime, they built a great core, and they just managed to dip under the tax. They're, according to our cap sheet no trade clause, about $400K under the luxury tax. So that's even better. If you can build a team like this, you can have success similar to last season, and you still get to share in the revenue sharing of the league. You're not your non-tax team, especially for a small market team like Indiana. That's huge. So they're in a great place right now. The pressure's on because now you're starting to pay all these guys big money, and people know you're coming. But if they play their cards right, I mean, they're going to be a force to the East for a long time. So any last thoughts, David, on any of these guys that we talked about here before we kind of sign off for this podcast?
No, I think it's just looking around the league. I don't see a lot of deals I would call truly bad. I think the league's a little better. They're doing a little better with not giving out awful contracts. Not that there aren't a couple, but generally speaking, I think like most of the deals that I saw this season, I'm like, okay, I can see that. So kudos to the league for not starting out with what was the horrendous Lakers one a couple of years back?
Mozgov, Bilal Deng.
Oh, Mozgov and Deng. Yeah.
Oh, man.
And Evan Turner.
Never forget.
Never
forget, man.
Teams have restrained themselves.
Yep. Alan Crabb, Bismack Biyombo. I mean, it just goes on and on.
I forgot those names.
Every team that was involved in one of those deals, I mean, they set themselves back for years when they did those deals. It was truly awful. But like you said, they've learned their lesson. This isn't 2016. It also helps that the total salary cap, there's cap smoothing in place now. So you're not going to get an influx of like $20 million in the total salary cap in one season. It's spaced out 10%, 10%, 10%. That helps a lot. So teams don't all of a sudden see all this extra spending power and they're like, oh, we got to spend all this money. We got to just give it to anybody that has a pulse. You're not going to see situations like that. So they're more measured. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I think also when you think about the the apron rules in place, that also plays a role in this. I think teams overall are more hesitant to kind of give guys big deals. I mean, I know it's not the sole reason, but I mean, Tyus Jones on the minimum, Lonnie Walker and
Lonnie Walker's on an Exhibit 10.
That blew my mind, man. Like, no way did he even get a fully guaranteed minimum deal. That was pretty insane, honestly, to see that happen. But it's just kind of this the environment in the NBA now. It's almost like a total course correction. Now, instead of mid players getting big money, you have legitimately good rotation guys scraping for the last bits of cash left in the league, which it's disappointing in a sense, but it just means that the league is in a great place as a whole, and might be time for some changes, maybe an expansion.
Let's go.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's ripe with opportunity right now, I guess is where this discussion is going across the league. So, that's pretty much all I got. David, thanks again for joining this pod. It was a great time. Once again, getting to discuss these deals with you, the league as a whole. Always good. Love your takes on Twitter and kind of what you bring to the community, especially from the CBA salary cap side. I think it's underutilized in a way. So love what you're doing there. Keep up the great work. And best of luck to you, man. It was great to get into catch up with you again a little bit.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's always fun to talk about this stuff with other people who like it. So,
oh yeah, we got to stick together, man. Good stuff. So if you guys are looking for more content like this, be sure to check out our website, notradeclause.com. We also have social media pages, No Trade Clause, one word, on Instagram, NoTrade_clause on X, and No Trade Clause over on YouTube. We have plenty of clips over there, shorts from this podcast, prior podcast. So be sure to check that out if you want to see more content like this. We will be covering more extensions if they happen. We have some other topics here coming up as we get closer to the season. Some previews are in store, a bunch of other stuff to help you get ready for the upcoming NBA season. So be sure to keep it locked over here, and we'll be sure to hook you guys up as best as we can. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and we hope to see you on the next installment of NTC. Take care.